All right. The dad report. Last week I said the dad report, yo. I didn't want to say that this week.
Yo, there, I
Yo.
said it.
There. Thank you. Thank you, Chad. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm well. A bit tired. The Amelia is I think it's her teeth. She's got molars coming in. We knew she had four coming in at once, and then one has come through, but like last night it seemed like she was waking up and crying every half hour or so. And I remember being very much awake between like 3 o'clock and 4:15 last night. So feel kind of like I'm back in that newborn phase. She's kind of clingy. Like it took me to rock her twice. And there's probably some parents out there who are like, she's 20 months, quit rocking her. But I mean, you only get these days, for so long. So yeah, I'm gonna rock
Yeah.
her.
Yeah, I have kind of both of those sides, right? It's like agreed. You only get so much of that. You also want to, but every parent has to figure it out. It's like the person that's like, kids aren't tough these days. You gotta just stick them down until they go to, well, that person is not having to go get your kid when
Right,
when
when
it
they're
just doesn't settle
sick or
down.
they're
Yeah.
they're hurting or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So those of us that have been there, I think, we all have a little more empathy to
Well, that's good.
like, yeah, um I'm past that phase.
You don't rock Pierce to sleep anymore?
No,
Okay.
no,
Okay.
I do not.
Worth a shot.
Nor Jude.
Oh.
Um so Justin, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit here.
Okay.
Uh because so you and I were talking about the AI thing the other day, right?
Yes.
And so just to catch everybody up, what we did is we did um, there is this AI chat thing that is sweeping the nations. And it's called Chat GBT or GBT or something like that. Anyway, so it's making its rounds because it you ask it a question and it gives you a pretty decent answer, and the language that it gives is pretty, it looks like a person is typing this stuff in, like just the way it is. So couple things. First, Justin, how we talked about that, I had it kind of write an intro for a podcast, right? So I'm
Yes.
gonna read the shortened version. So I asked it to do a one, and then it came back with one that was fairly lengthy, and so I asked for a shorter one. So here's what it came up with. Welcome to the Dad Report, where we discuss the challenges and joys of fatherhood and build a community of supportive dads. Join host and then fill in the blank as we explore parenting tips and expert insights on fatherhood. Whether you're a new dad or a pro, the Dad Report is here to make the journey a little easier. Tune in now.
There you
So there
have
you
it.
go. So that's the short version, and I think
You
it
hear
was
that?
kind
We're
of,
experts,
we are, yes, yes. Thank you.
according
Thank
to
you,
the
AI.
AI.
Yes. So and then as I'm preparing tonight, slash waiting for Amelia to go down, I thought, well, this is the dad report. I wonder if this sucker can tell me any dad jokes.
Ooh, what you got? You got some AI dad jokes.
Yeah, I've got here. Let me pick from a couple. So the first one I got was this. Why did the tomato turn red?
Uh, Sunburned?
Because it saw the salad dressing.
Oh, oh, oh. Ooh, that's funny right there.
Okay, let's see. Which one kind of made me legitimately laugh? Oh, why don't oysters give to charity?
Why don't oysters give to charity? Is there a pearl either that a pearl or a clam pun in here?
No, it's because they're shellfish.
Hmm. But there it is.
All right. Now, there's
Shellfish.
one more I want to say
Uh-huh.
because I think it messed up here.
Okay.
So,
Is there a
why
dirty
did the
word?
no, there's not. And I think you'll see what I mean when I read it. Why did the cookie go to the doctor?
Go to the doctor. I don't know.
So, I'll let you finish it because it was feeling
Crummy?
crummy. Yes, that is the correct answer. However, what this AI chat gave me was because it was feeling crumbly.
Oh, yeah, I think it goofed.
Yeah. So there you go. So
I
we
wonder,
have we have found an issue.
I wonder if that means that crummy is a slang. Like it's not a legitimate verified dictionary word, and the AI, being a computer program, can't use human slang. So the closest it had was crumbly. Don't know why
Yeah.
I'm defending Eagle Eye over here,
No,
but
totally. Yeah, that's the deal, right? So it knows English. It can even be somewhat conversational,
mm-hmm,
but the slang is the slang is a difficult
that
a
is.
difficult thing to grasp, you think about somebody who's like still learning your language, like they're not completely fluent, and they'll start to say things in a weird tense or whatever. And
Yep.
this isn't kind of that obvious, but still, it's I picked up as like, oh, that's the first, and I've been playing around with it a little bit. But that's the first kind of issue I found. Anyway,
Yeah.
I thought that
There's
was
definitely an AI craze or wave sweeping um I guess the nation or social media, like when the art app came out. There was that wave where everybody was posting like ape pictures of themselves, like, yeah, this AI painted me. And everybody was like, oh, it's a Russian app. You're just selling your information to the Russians. Kind of like when TikTok blew up and everybody's like the Chinese. Um, but that was kind of one of the first starts, I think, was that. I think Japan for some time, like there are Japanese who are like dating AI. Like they have written programs to keep them from feeling lonely, and it recreates that dopamine hit from when you get a text. And it's kind of scary how quickly it's progressing. Eagle Eye obviously and Terminator kind of called where this stuff was headed, but it's here.
yeah. So I mean, the bottom line is Skynet is here. If
Uh-huh.
you don't know what I'm talking about, go check out the first couple Terminator movies.
Don't watch with your kids. That's one of those back to our movies podcast
Yes.
episode from a couple of weeks ago. That's one of those 80s R is something different in today's world. So,
So it's here. It is, supposedly here to help us fake our term papers and write songs and whatever else we need, right? However, we cannot trust it. Why? Well, we should take a we should take a lesson from the atom. You can't trust atoms either. They're always making up everything. Okay, so that's another one it gave me. Tried to fit that one in. Okay.
There you go. There you go.
So that's all I got on the AI front. I thought it was cool. I've heard it on a couple of podcasts, and I've kind of seen it making its rounds, and I don't know.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun to play around with, but it also is a little bit scary. I mean, it's very human like in the way that it's chatting. So I can foresee you have a website where you're doing like, chatting with somebody to get help, and like there's a future where you don't know if you're talking to an actual person. So,
Right, like your therapist could actually be an AI designed to ask the right questions and give the appropriate responses. Yeah,
yeah,
but they can't
for
recreate
sure.
empathy. I think eventually we're going to find that where there's that line of you can only fake emotions so much from an AI perspective. Um, Anywho, wild.
Yeah. Yeah. So there we are. So life as we know it is ending. We will be used
It's
as
the
batteries.
end of the world. Okay. And he just went Matrix. So
Yes, that was from the Matrix.
there you
Um
have it.
okay, so Justin, we were kind of talking over text, and I think one thing that we wanted to talk about was Gen Z, and maybe from a little bit of a different perspective. So the I was part of a conversation,
hmm
and the line went like this. Speaking of the upcoming generation, right? Generation Z, as we call them. So my kids' generation.
Okay.
This generation is going to hell in a handbasket. And it's a somewhat dated term, right? I haven't heard that term in a while, but right.
I was gonna
So
say, I feel
it
like my parents, or at least their parents, were
yeah.
using hell in a handbasket. So
Oh
it's
yeah.
definitely an older generation's language.
Yes, and this was that. Uh So I heard it, and it was kind of a passing comment. I don't even remember where the conversation, kind of came from, where it was going, and that was said, and it was said kind of in a Christian context. I know you're super surprised, uh, but uh, but anyway, I heard that, and it got me thinking um about a couple of things. So I asked you, and we kind of went a few different places.
Yeah.
Um, so the obvious place is, well, yeah, like no different than any other generation,
Right.
right?
Which we talked
And
about on this podcast before, like with
absolutely,
the Socrates quote from last
yeah,
season, and
yeah.
yeah.
And history tends to romanticize generations, but every
Yes.
generation has their problems.
hmm
Um, kind of even take like politics, for example. Like we think that the generations that came before us, they were very civil. No, that is not the case. Like, not at all. Um,
Let
if
me
you know
educate you
your
on the Red Scare and how we accused everybody of being an American backstabbing communist.
or you
But
want to go
yes,
back to the
very
beginning
civil.
when our country started, before there was like freedom of the press, like you said something bad about a politician, you got thrown in jail, right?
Or
Like that,
worse.
or worse. And yeah, and so long story short, yes. So but kind of wanted to move on from that perspective,
hmm
kind of to the talk about the generation a little bit. And you were talking about empathy, which I think is a really good word. um so I don't know, Justin, I do have some stats prepared. I don't want to go down this road too far, because
I like
I would like to
statistics and
kind of,
data.
well, I would like to talk about what we do with it, but so
Yeah.
I've got a couple things. So let me know kind of what you think here. But just to give kind of a um kind of overview of Gen Z, right? So Gen Z are, and it's different everywhere you look, but basically think late 90s to the 2010s ish. Uh,
Okay.
that's the generation, right? Generation Z. Call it Generation Z because
So I'm
I
somewhat on the fence then. Like I straddle millennial and Gen Z because
yes, and
I'm 96, so I'm like
yeah. So you could be, yeah, you could really be either, kind of depending on where you get your
how I
numbers
choose to
from.
identify.
Yeah, and I'm the same with X and Y. So I identify for the most part as kind of the end of Generation X, and
Okay.
then um Y millennials, right? Generation Y, also known as millennials. That started like 82-ish
Mm-hmm.
is kind of as far as I know. And then Z is the next one that came, this website I'm looking at now says 97, but I've seen 96, I've
Okay.
seen 97. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's where it gets its name from. Some people call them the Zoomers, right?
Ah!
For a couple reasons, like one being, kind of a take on, they call everybody
Okay, boomer.
boomer,
Yeah.
so Zoomer, right? Um,
Oh Lord.
Another, of course, we talking about the virus that shall not be named,
Mm.
right?
Yeah,
Everybody
that one.
quarantine, everybody on Zoom, right? So there's some of that in there as well.
Okay.
So anyway, so there we go. They are, they are the most diverse generation that we've had.
All right.
Um, and I'm sure there's somewhere where that would not be the case, but at least like in our country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where we are, you go back to the last several generations and definitely much more diverse. I've heard that by the time all of the people from Generation Z get to adulthood, it's like 1 in 4 will be Hispanic or something like
Oh,
that. Pretty crazy. Um, so they
and we're
are the
just
most.
talking United States.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
where. So some of the studies that a lot of these websites point to, like from Pew Research and whatnot, it's all U.S. based data. Um, so the most diverse, and they're talking about like racially and ethnically diverse, but
Mm-hmm.
man, just kind of and that's, I guess, more empirical data, but more like anecdotal kind of stuff. Like, we've talked about us both being involved in youth ministry. And when I go to church on a Wednesday night and I see the kids showing up, like, I'll tell you, I remember back when I was that age, it's like people dressed a certain way. Like
Yeah.
all the surfer skater kids dressed a certain way. Some of the kids that were more, into like music or whatever, they would dress, but everybody kind of had a theme, and I felt like there was pressure to, I don't know, to kind of dress a certain way, a certain style. And um but like today, I just don't see that. Now there is some of that in that, like, you'll see girls all like, wearing the same thing, like they all come for whatever reason in their pajama pants. I don't understand that. But
Ah.
anyway, just an example.
Or Nike shorts that they cover up with a large T-shirt, and it's very misleading.
Yes,
I hate
yeah,
that
or
trend. I
yeah, it
hate it.
looks like they're wearing their daddy's sweatshirt.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's trends like that, but I will say, like, I see kids that you can tell they have things in common, but they're just dressed completely differently. And
Mm.
so they're diverse. I see the generation is diverse in a lot of different ways, I guess is what I'm getting at anecdotally, right? So that's what they're talking about. But as I look at them, kids I know that come from that generation, like, it's just, I don't know, it seems like there's a lot of creativity, a lot of diversity, whatever. So
There's a lot of individuality, and the narrative that you were allowed to express your individuality.
mhm.
Whereas before, to express your individuality, at least the narrative that history tells us, right? Depending on where you're at. And again, that's back to, and I know we're trying to stay kind of out of that lane of, well, there's always been this generation. I think the last time you saw a generation where individuality, creativity was almost encouraged and therefore thrived would have been, let's say, ancient Greeks might have been the first round. Then you have the Romans who follow that up. Then the Turks, actually, when the Ottoman Empire came in and kept the area. Now that looked different because of the religious values they had. So certain things were restricted, but their creativity came out through math and algebra. You can thank them for that. And their architecture, which then got stolen by the Crusaders. And then you have the Renaissance, and there's this rebirth of expressionism. But then you kind of go back into this land of, where you should not express your individuality, or only, then you had to kind of break a norm and prove that what you were doing wasn't going to harm anybody. I think of like the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, where that medium had to be. I mean, you had to really break onto the scene, and then everything you told had to be very carefully done. So your "I Love Lucy's," you may hint at sex by them joking about sliding the beds together as a married couple. But the fact that they kept the beds separated on the show as a married couple goes to tell you how much that narrative was controlled. And I was
Sure.
picking on a minor, and I don't know the full. Again, I haven't studied this. This was not my. I was a world history concentration. As I said, I'm like, man, that kind of a cool capstone project would have been to feel like I want to explore the history of creativity and individualism, um, which I guess we call modernism or postmodernism. But anywho, so that's I guess that's my thought is we are now in a generation where it's kind of come back around full circle to where I guess the Greeks were at, where it's very much go and show, go and create. So as far as your anecdotal diversity, so outside of just ethnicity, outside of just I guess male, female, I don't know what the other, stats are on. I do think that's where part of it comes from. You no longer have to fit a mold. You can like metal music, but dress in a suit. You don't have to wear goth. You don't have to identify yourself as goth. That might be the other part of it too, is the idea that identity now is more complex than just a single layer. It's moved beyond two dimension. It's now my identity is. I mean, look at our and social media is partly to blame, but like look at I guess our Instagram bios and our Facebook bios where they encourage us in 100 characters or less to essentially label ourselves. And nobody ever has just one. Now, a few people do, but they just have one label, right? But a lot of us are like, from mine example, it's Jesus follower, disc golfer, or Jesus follower, husband, father, podcaster, disc golfer, and maybe student pastor in there. And so I've actually got a label. I have 6 or 7 labels because that's what I feel like are all parts of my identity. So maybe I am Gen Z. Yikes. I always identified as millennial because I didn't eat Tide Pods, so
Tide Pods.
I didn't want to be
Um,
associated with those crazy crackheads.
so it's interesting you mentioned the Greeks because another thing I was going to mention is they are also the most educated, uh,
Mm.
so comparing to all the recent generations, um, in terms of,
Well,
those.
what's the definition of educated?
So there's a couple of benchmarks. I know one is like high school diploma, so the percentage
Okay.
of those that will, but so part of the problem though is that a significant part of that generation has not yet gotten to like high school graduated age, right? So
Right.
Jude, who is 11, is part of that generation, right?
Okay.
So, but if you think about it, it makes sense because they have another thing that they're characterized by is this digital upbringing, right?
Right.
Don't know a life, they don't know life without the internet.
Right.
And
And
that looked different, right? Like it's not like they had their iPhone coming out of the womb, but different levels of connectivity. Like I remember in the late 90s, we were kind of that's when I want to say it was late 90s. Yeah, when we had like AOL,
yeah.
instant messenger and that kind of stuff. So like early internet, still pretty
Yeah.
slow, right? Not quite what we have now, but
I
like
had
it was starting.
yeah, as I hit middle school, I learned how to write, they taught me how to write letters growing up. I don't know if they even teach that anymore. Now all the letters you receive are typically government issued. Um, but I as I hit middle school, email, which both had an IM chat feature or just like Gmail had blown up onto the scene. Then you had these MMO, um, RPG games where you could run around and chat and interact with other people you've never met before, and just like the world expanded radically. Because I was born '96, so I hit middle school in '08 ish. Um, So I mean, I grew up with the original Xbox, and then by the time I'm graduating high school, they're announcing the Xbox One. I mean, you're going from a game that looks like somebody hand drew it to now you've got games where if you're not paying close enough attention, it looks like real life. It technology moves fast.
Yeah, and so Pierce and I had a conversation about technology because I just heard some stuff that I just could not get out of my mind in terms of that. So and he, he was in this boat too, right? So since he doesn't really know life without that. Like I remember the first it's like an Android tablet he had, and he was like, I don't know, 6 or 7. And we started
Mm-hmm.
slow, right? It wasn't like he was taking it, you know, he was like, falling asleep watching Netflix at the time or anything. But he playing Angry Birds, whatnot. But
Oh yeah.
connected, right? All that kind of stuff. And so, but I heard recently a couple things, and one for Gen Z specifically, and one thing on technology is they said if you think about it, um, and it increased with each generation. But
Mm-hmm.
I grew up, and it's this concept of private versus public screens. So I grew up on public screens, right? Meaning in my house, we had like a TV in the living room.
Yep.
I was an older teenager by the time I convinced my parents to let me have a TV in my bedroom, which was probably an awful idea. Like let's just be honest. That probably should have never happened. But so for the most part, our TV was out in the living room where everybody could see it. Our computer was the same way. Uh and so these screens we had access to were, public, right?
Right.
Now these kids are growing up with private screens, right? So, and I was talking to Pierce about this, about how, hey, like this tendency for you to kind of shut yourself off. And maybe that's a little harsh, but going in your room, turning on
Mm-hmm.
YouTube, and just staying in there for a couple hours. Um, Even though you're not doing anything that, I wouldn't approve of or whatever, you could do the same thing in the living room. He's just like, I want some alone time. So he's going to do that. That just does different things. And we were talking about how just our upbringings are different simply because of that one thing.
Right.
And he actually agreed. I thought he was really going to push back. So he really likes the fact that he can do that. But I think he also sees that it's kind of like, Spider-Man, great power, great responsibility scenario. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and so that was interesting. So there's also a big emphasis on um like right finances. So think education, right? So finances, and another big one is mental health. So interesting enough, there's a big emphasis on mental health. And they say, and again, I don't have the numbers here, but they say that um Gen Z is more open to
Mm-hmm.
discussing mental health, going to some sort of a counselor, therapist, whatever,
Yeah.
than previous generations. But they are also like the most stressed, the most depressed, etc. generation that's alive. Like,
Yeah.
um, which is crazy. And so I heard I heard recently, and this is probably more anecdotal than anything, but I think it kind of gets the point across that um, the average teenager today is dealing with the same level of stress that a mental institution patient in the 1950s was dealing with. Now, again, I don't really know where that comes from. I heard that on a podcast, and it really made me stop. I'm like, let me go back and listen to that
Hold
again.
on.
Um,
That's
and
such a. You're good. Go ahead and finish your thought.
Um, and somebody's a lot smarter than me who said it. So, I'm prone to agree. I've mentioned that to people. Some people are like, oh yeah, I can totally see it. Like, look, like they are connected 100% of the time,
Mm-hmm.
online, social media, yada yada yada. And I see it. I see my kids dealing with stressors that I never had to deal with. Like, I mean, I was what, 17, 18 by the time I could instant message like with a girl,
Right.
right? And oh, and by the
Right.
way, like my computer's right there, my mom's like right next door in the kitchen. Like, I'm
Also, if
not
she
really,
says put it up, go for dinner, you have to like,
yeah,
you
yeah,
don't get there's no buzz in your pocket. It's
yeah.
just, well, I hope she
Chad, I'm
responds
gonna
by
pick
nine
up the
o'clock.
Chad, I'm gonna pick up the phone and the internet's done. Like
Yeah.
it's dial up. Y'all look it up. It was a real thing.
Yeah.
Mom picks up the phone and all of your plans are ruined.
Oh man. Remember minutes?
So and that
Oh
that has
man.
been that's been and I've been paying attention to that more and more lately.
Yeah.
Because of that, but even just kind of trying to kind of study my kids and get to know them better and that kind of thing. Like it is it's crazy the things that they are dealing with. And my kids are homeschooled,
Yeah.
right? So we have a little more control over their environment than most parents do. Now Pierce, he's getting older. He's out there more. He's a job and he's doing different things. Um, but still, I would say I have more access to him than I would have if he had gone to school, to like a
Mm.
public, private, whatever school. So that's another. So there's like all this stuff working together. Oh, and by the way, like they're also like the most religious unaffiliated, right?
Yes.
However, balancing that, they also have a big emphasis of like social justice.
Yes.
So, what you will hear people in kind of like the, Christianity, religion sphere say is that you've got, you've got these kids coming up and they're like, look, I don't really want to go to church, although a kid growing up in a household with a mom and a dad more likely to go to church, right? So there's that. But the point they make is that they may not I don't really want to go through the motions. Now give me a cause and I'm
Hmm.
down. Like show me a church that is reaching like the poor in their
Yeah.
communities.
Yeah.
Those that the uh I mean, at 11:22 we're kind of getting into what we're calling, 10:10 abundant life, right? Come from John 10:10 and um you know really really focusing in on pro-life, like womb to tomb is what we call it, right? So a mom that's having a baby and you got the elderly person who's in a nursing home,
Yeah.
and think of like all the pro-life issues in between there are the
Yeah.
things that we're trying to get into, um to really make a dent in this community. And I think of those kinds of things as things that will um attract these people. And when I have a conversation with Pierce, he is very quick to push back, to find the hole, right, to make the argument. um and so I think we had talked about reading the book Radical by David Platt, which
Yeah.
if you're listening and you haven't read that book, it's basically talking about how um quote unquote radical Christianity is really just biblical Christianity, like the things that Jesus calls us to do,
Right.
right? That is, part of every Christian's walk. It's kind of the basis of this book. And as Pierce and I were reading through it together, I had read it already as a teenager. I think I was like probably 17, 18 when I read it the first time, reading through it with him. And he's like, wait, he's like, so this guy is trying to tell me that I have to sell everything I have and go to Africa and live on rice and beans for the rest of my life. While this person over here is doing this person over here is doing this. And um, kind of I had to turn it back around and say, I don't think that's what it's saying. I said, but I think a concept that it's dealing with is you have to hold your life so loosely in your hands that if God were calling you to do that, A, you'd hear him, and B, you would say, hey, my life is yours. What do you want me to do?
Yep.
And that he was like, okay, I can he's like, I can get into that. And then we have the uncomfortable conversation of, so what's that thing for you? What is it that he's calling you to do?
Right.
Oh, Dad, I don't know.
I
I'm
don't
like, it's
know.
cool. You're 16 still. At the time, he was like a year too younger. So it was, but just kind of getting him to think about that. And so I say that to say, like, he's very bright. He's very well connected. He knows what's going on in the news. I will tell you a lot of times, hey, Dad, you hear about this thing? No. Oh yeah, I saw a video, or I saw something on YouTube, or I saw something on Reddit or whatever. And he's telling me sometimes about current events before I've had a chance to see the news, over the last couple of days, whatever.
Hmm.
And so it's kind of crazy. Um, so yeah, man, I just threw a whole lot at you, and I'm curious. I'm curious what you think. Like when I was looking at all this, I was looking at this through
Ah,
the lens of, okay, this is learning about generation that our kids are in, and
yeah.
how can I how can I use this information to kind of know where they're coming from, maybe to have a little bit of empathy versus saying,
Right.
oh, this generation is lost. They're all going to
They're
hell,
going to hell in a handbasket. I,
Amen,
I,
brother.
I think that person who says that, yeah, I think they have no empathy. I think they just want to see the world through their lens, not accept that the world keeps turning. But we can come back to that later. I heard a lot with
I'm
the
just gonna
mental
blow this up and move on.
yeah, I think with the mental health conversation of it, I heard one of my favorite podcasts right now. I challenge anybody, I don't care if you're a believer or not, the man will convict you. But The Basement by Tim Ross. I just holy cow, I've been on a like I look forward to him posting a new episode because it's just so full of like nuggets of conviction and challenge. And like my buddy and we both watched the same one the other day, and we were like, holy crap, like we needed that. And then there's just been some stuff personally where both of us are like, wow, God's calling us into some new stuff. And not because that podcast told us, but because it opened us to be more open to the Spirit's prompting. So all that aside, he's talking about mental health in one of these episodes, and I forget who he's chatting to or chatting with, but he said a stat has come out that at the rate mental health is going, that in a couple of years, in the next couple of decades, mental health will be the next global pandemic, if it's not technically already. And I think that's I think there's nuances to it, right? To say this generation is, you know, as stressed as a 1950s mental asylum person, okay, that's a nuance. Go back to what the 1950s prescribed as being a upright citizen. You think of very much the kind of black and white films, and you stayed in your box, woman in the kitchen, you went to work. So to even express emotions, unless you were a woman, like if you were a male expressing emotions, yes, you looked like as crazy because that's not your job. The woman's supposed to do that. You're just supposed to provide and have sex and eat the food and do it all over again. And make sure your family goes to church. Make sure your kids don't play with the neighbors across the street because they look different than you. Um, so I think there's, it's like, okay, what's your the other thing I've always wondered is, what's how do you statistically measure somebody's stress? What's your chart? Everybody's version of stress is different, be with or without technology, you know.
Well, an individual person, yeah, but
Well,
there's,
what's the global like? How do they do that across a wide spread?
well, I think they use things, right? So people being diagnosed with things caused by stress, also things like depression,
Hmm.
right? Going to see going to see a mental health professional about stress,
Yeah, see,
regarding depression, these
I
kind of
think
things.
that's just that this generation is more willing to do it, and so all your data is being pumped by Gen Z, and the generations beforehand will never admit to it. I mean, um, my grandpa could not, and I love him to death, could not process very well when I was hospitalized for self-harm. It would never have been a thing in his day. But I remember a little while later, I don't remember this how recent this was. I want to say it was my grandpa who also talked about having dark moments or dark periods in his life. Different language, same concept. He went through a depression. Now, I do think there's some romanticizing of depression now. I think there's, we I don't know, I don't want to treat, especially as someone who's been through it, I don't want to I don't know what the word is, reduce the seriousness of some of this. But I do think there's a certain level of glorification that's going on. I do think there's a certain level of, almost we're almost encouraged to glorify and wallow in my depression before I ever actually try to get out of
So I will say, it makes sense to me for a couple of reasons. Um, One is the emphasis on education, and that seems weird. But if you go back to the 90s when I
it.
was in high school, they did, and this is really nationwide. And if you disagree with me, I would love to hear from you. Um,
Please leave those
Really. I mean, that
responses.
may have sounded patronizing, but no, really, I would. So in the 90s, right? So I graduated high school in 1999. And
Old
in that old boomer,
boomer.
uh, in that in that era, I'll say,
Hmm.
the professionals
Yeah,
that were educating us decided, you know what? If we educate these kids, they will make the right decision. So let's talk up the sex talk as much as possible.
right.
I had that. I feel like from middle school on, I had that like every year. Like
Yeah.
everybody's going into a room and we're gonna have the talk. And then,
Here's how to
eventually it
use a
became,
condom.
yeah, in high school, it was, there were different things. I had to take, like, I feel like every year in high school, I had to take like a sex ed class. That's probably not accurate, but it's just like I felt like
But
it was
you
just being,
remember it. You remember that there was a certain level of emphasis that like
for
you
sure.
you have that memory even now 20 years removed.
For sure. And I think the point I'm getting at is that it really had, like, did we get teenage pregnancy under control? No, it got worse. Did we get, STDs under control? Did we, was there no longer a need for a woman to have an abortion because she knew what sex was and she then could take all the precautions she needed to prevent a pregnancy? Like, that did not happen, right?
Right.
May have happened for one person here or there, but largely the problem increased, did not decrease. And as I look at my kids, their friends, their larger community and beyond, I see I see kids that are, better educated than I was.
Yeah.
Like, let's just talk for a minute about the amazing documentaries on Netflix.
Yeah.
I have learned more about World War II since I got a Netflix subscription than I learned in like high school and college combined about
Right.
World War II. It's amazing. But, and that, I mean, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
Right.
But just kind of using that as an example of the information that's out there, and they're just being bombarded left and right. Uh, it has been proven that, you know, exposure to social media, hours a day, definitely increases stress, increases depression, makes you compare. And I will tell you, we were having a desire of the eyes conversation in
Mm.
students here recently, and I will tell you, in talking to some of these boys, the number one thing that they felt like was taking their eyes off of Jesus was comparison.
Hmm.
And I'm like,
And boys,
yeah, yeah. And I'm like, y'all are putting off like you don't care what anybody says, you know,
right?
playing this tough guy thing. But yeah, man. So yeah, I don't know. I will say you know, in previous generations, I'll say kind of where I was in before, it was like, well, son, you just got to keep your mouth shut and just, white knuckle it and get
Toughen
through it.
up. Yeah,
Um,
I heard that before.
yeah, which, and are there people that need to go and work, get the job done? Are they making excuses? I'm sure there are. But I think what the access to, you know, mental health and the stigma being decreased for mental health is a good thing.
Oh,
And
absolutely. Yeah, don't hear me misspeak
um
on that.
no, 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 yeah, and I know. And we've
Okay.
talked, you've shared on this podcast about, your history, some of your struggles with that, and I wouldn't even assume something like that.
Yeah.
But I think the if nothing else, I think the environment is there, and it's ripe. And
Mm.
um I think kid if nothing else is true, I think kids growing up in this generation um have more access than anyone else has, and it's kind of opening up Pandora's box.
Yeah.
Um Now, there's a lot of naysayers too, because of like, yeah, well, like uh back when World War II was going on, teenagers went to war, right? Um and that it's just not a fair comparison. But
And
um
who's to say that these teenagers wouldn't give them, but their war looks different. Give them, like you said, give them a cause, give them something.
yeah,
This generation values, because of the overload of knowledge, they now are valuing the why. Why do I need to know this? Why does it matter? Why does it matter that you tell me? What's the purpose? I think it's part of this. I heard, went to a student pastor conference a couple months ago, and that was one of the final session little seminar things. Was the guy was like, listen, the students know about Jesus. He's like, they are well aware of who he is. They need to see in your life, and they need to hear from your life why he is so needed in theirs. Like he's like, they want to see hardcore empirical data. I think it's one thing that makes 1122 so attractive to those down in Jacksonville, and maybe even those watching across the globe, is the remember why I love the teaching, as far as like it always goes back to the Gospels, because the gospel is the why. And then on top of that, Joby will take it further. The leadership team there takes it further and is like the 1010 life, womb to tomb. They're not just gonna sit here and chalk up some vision for the next year or 2 years and be like, God spoke to us and the vision is peace. Like they're like they would tell you it's malarkey. They want a vision they can put their teeth into. And so when
yeah,
1122 leadership sits down and is like, hey, we are going to go all out, I know they mean it, because when we first moved down there, one of the first things I heard about was the strip club ministry, where they had women who'd go in.
yeah. Hadassah's
And,
hope. Yep.
right, and it's like, okay, that's pretty cool. So when you say, hey, we're going to be, and not pick it, man, Joby can't stand those Westboro guys. I know he can't. I know he can't. He just call them Pharisees to their face. Um, but they'll be there to walk with those mamas. They'll be there to walk with those elderly people. They'll be there in the orphanages and shelters. Like I can't wait to
Yeah.
see what happens the next 2 years. And I think that's just like for this generation, that's what they need as a why. And I think maybe some of their stress then comes from they're so inundated with information and technology and education that like as they scroll, they're just like they don't get any sense of a why because everything is bombarding them from every angle. These algorithms are tailored to what they follow. And so, what is truth anymore? And they don't know who to trust. When you can't trust something, I mean, that rocks you. When you can't trust, like that really upsets a lot of how you operate. Um, like I
Yeah.
have to trust this chair. I trust that I can sit down in this chair and it's gonna hold me. But if I scroll through, Instagram for any given amount of time and see posts, well, there was this shooting and here's who committed it and here's why. But then you see somebody else, well, no, it was blah blah blah, and there's no empirical data, there's no whatever. Like it's just they're young, so they want to be easily trusting, and then they keep having their trust repeatedly broken or doubted over and over and over again as they scroll.
Yeah, I mean, I remember as a kid, um, watching the news and thinking, "Oh, this is what actually is going down."
Right.
Now, is there a spin on it? Yeah, but as a kid,
Always.
you're like, "No,
This is
this is
truth.
just it." And now, depending on where you're getting your news from, you're getting not just a spin, but an entirely different story,
Polar opposite.
polar opposite.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Um, and so that, yeah, that's just gotta, I mean, that's gotta make you have to grow up super quick. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but but yeah, and and we see, like as a parent, you're not gonna see like these, social trends of the next generation or whatever. But you see what's happening to your kid. Like
Yeah.
you see, like when I see my kid spends 2 hours buried in a screen and he comes out looking like the Walking Dead. Wait a minute, that's probably not a great thing. Like,
Yeah.
how about no? Like,
Yeah.
how about let's not do that? So that's that. But kind of the more I was digging into this, the more I started seeing that's really where, for me, that's where kind of the empathy started coming from. Um,
Yeah.
because you start to see, oh wow, like this generation is dealing stuff with that I didn't have to deal with. And I think that concept can also apply to those generations that came before, right? So you've got the greatest generation and then the baby boomers after that, and they dealt with things like that I didn't have to see. Like a lot of
Right.
those people, you know, baby is born, dad goes off to war, never comes home. Right. That that is the thing.
Yeah, we've
That is the
never
thing
had to
that
live
happened.
through World
Yeah,
War II, Vietnam, Korean conflict, the Cold
correct.
War, the Red Scare. Like every
Yeah.
generation has its kind of defining factor, feature.
Yeah.
Um, and on some scales, I would probably lean with that older generation where it's like, well, yeah, these kids have never seen war. They don't know and that's because I'm more patriotic. And so, I was denied opportunity to serve for this country just because of some medical stuff. And so I'm like, all right, well, anything I can do at home. No, I don't show up. I'm not gonna be one of those like January Sixers. Like I'm not completely crazy, but there's a certain level of patriotism that I feel for our country, just not nationalistically. I'll tell you when they're being stupid on both sides of the fence. Um,
Tell
but
them.
I think, we started with that. You overheard somebody saying this generation went to the hell in a handbasket. And I think it's probably where we should end the conversation because I think you're right. You've got that generation looking down on the younger ones, but at the same time, you got these younger generations looking up at them and going, You're also going to hell in a handbasket. There it's a cry of lean in. I think what that speaks to when somebody says that phrase, it is an unwillingness to understand another human individual, an unwillingness to ask a question, an unwillingness to shake a hand. You do not have to agree. Simple as that. Agree to disagree, but for good Lord, don't shun them or tell them they're going to hell. You know, that's a heavy statement. Like, lean in, get to know. All right, so you don't understand depression and anxiety. That's all right. They don't understand the mustard gas that you were afraid of every morning in the bunker. But y'all can come to some kind of a conclusion that both of you are humans and led a life and that there's some brokenness in there. Good Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, so if I'm gonna sum up Gen Z, and this is not my thought, is that just kind of like the one word is more,
Mm,
like more of just whatever, like more education, more diversity, more stress, more, uh, you know, in terms of the emphasis on things. Um, and yeah, man, I guess, and I have I have no right to tell anybody how to parent their kid, but like as I look at this, kind of what we're faced with, you know, there's some dangers, but some of the good things that maybe we didn't touch on too much. Some of the good things though is that when you have when you have a kid, uh, and I'm talking very stereo
stereotypically.
there it is, stereotypical about this generation, but talking about when they get into a cause, right? You're not going to have this just kind of, well, I'm a Christian because my daddy's a Christian kind of
Right,
thing, where it's like, no, I'm a Christian because I believe in Jesus, right?
right.
Uh, and willing to put that faith into action, which I think is a great trait that we're seeing in a lot of this generation as well. So, um, yeah. So,
Yeah.
and honestly, I don't know what hell in a handbasket even means. Maybe somebody could tell us what that. Like,
Yeah. What is
you ever
that?
think about a phrase and you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't make sense.
Where'd you
Hell
get
isn't in a
that?
handbasket. You can't put hell in a handbasket. Anyway,
That'd be a fun language study or phrase study. There are people who study that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I guess I don't know if we accomplished what you wanted to accomplish, but you know, I don't knock Gen Z. I do think, speaking to those parents, like just I don't know if I even have. I mean, I gotta raise my kid with that, right? Like she's already grown up with a screen, so I think it's just be diligent, be mindful of kind of like our culture conversation a few weeks ago. Be mindful of what they're intaking, and then be ready to explain the whys behind stuff. No longer is it gonna fly with the "well, I said so" kind of conversation. You're gonna have to elaborate. But when you do, I think it seats something much deeper. And like you said, Chad, I mean, I think this generation, I think we are seeing a number of Christians dwindling, but I think the Christians that will raise up out of Gen Z, those Jesus followers, they will be on a different kind of fire than even your generation and my generation are, because they won't just have a Bible tells me so, or my parents' faith, or I grew up in church. It's gonna be kind of like the Apostle Paul. I met a man on the road named Jesus. He turned my life around, and I owe it all to him. And they gonna run after it.
yeah, man. And speaking of that, one thing that reaches across generations is kids seeing their parents, seeing their wider community living
Hmm.
out what they believe
Yeah,
authentically. What, faith, values, all of those things. Because it's one thing to say, yeah, I believe in this right, but to see someone living their life towards that thing is is huge. And so
yeah,
that's something that works across all generations.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
all right.
Cool. You want to do the honors tonight, sir?
Yes, I think we have been through it. We would love to hear from you. Did you like this? Do you want more of this? Do you want us to follow up and figure out what hell in a handbasket actually means, where it came from, or should we just move on?
I'm gonna title this episode "Hell in a Handbasket."
Oh, I love it. I love it. So Justin, with that, I think we will call this data report closed. Thank you for listening to this week's episode. You can support us by sharing the show with your friends and family. Please subscribe, rate, and leave a review.
Want more of the Dad Report? Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and even join the community over on Discord. Don't forget to send us your dad jokes for a chance to be featured on the show.
Remember the words of Billy Graham about fatherhood. A good father is one of the most unsung, unpraised, unnoticed, and yet one of the most valuable assets in our society.
So if you are a dad, we're cheering you on. If you have a dad, be kind to him. And if you know a dad, tell him about our podcast.